All of our existing assumptions on how software actually gets built are being rewritten. Right now, teams are shipping in hours what used to take weeks. It's so disruptive. This is the new default. In this conversation, we speak to Nick Arcolano, head of research at Jellyfish, a PhD in applied mathematics from Harvard, a decade at MIT's Lincoln Lab. Nick and his team sit on what is probably the world's largest dataset on AI's real impact on engineering. 20 million pull requests from 200,000 engineers, 700 companies and counting. And what that data shows is a real paradox. Coding speed has roughly doubled with AI adoption, but overall business output, impact, that's barely moved. Now, Nick says we've done the easy part. We've made the developers faster. The hard part is now making the rest of the company keep up. And maybe that's where most of us are actually stuck right now. We can begin by telling me about Jellyfish, because I think it is seriously interesting what you guys are doing. Totally unique.
Yeah, so Jellyfish, we're in the space of, we like to say, engineering observability, right? So company's been around. Geez, I've been there almost 8 years now. Company started, like 9.5, 10 years ago. And the founders, they all have this great engineering pedigree, came together originally at a company called Endeca, had great success there, went off to do other things, and then came back after, having these engineering careers and realizing just what a complex machine that is and all these problems, how hard it is to really understand the health of your engineering teams. Are they building what you think they're building? Are the resources going where you think they're going? So that was the genesis of the company. In a lot of ways, this category didn't exist. The sort of sales force for engineering, that wasn't a thing. Originally, we had to convince customers this was a thing they needed to buy. Now it's obvious there's a ton of competitors, but the huge shift has been AI, right? Like you can't have a conversation now about what it means to be a healthy, performant engineering team, or what it means to spend your engineering resources wisely to achieve your business goals. You can't have that conversation without talking about the role of AI and all of that. So we pivoted early into insights into AI tooling and observability on the kind of human and team level. How are people using these tools? What are they accomplishing? How is the software development lifecycle evolving? Is it giving you productivity gains? And ultimately, is it helping you achieve your business goals?
And you get what you where do you get your data from? You're pulling, I think you were early into Copilot access, your everything happening on GitHub and requests going through that. And then what you kind of standardize that information into one picture. So tell me
Yeah,
about that
absolutely.
process.
So the substrate and kind of the core competency for almost a decade for Jellyfish has been understanding engineering process. So that meant GitHub, Git various Git forges, GitLab, whatever. So where the code is being delivered, pull requests, comments, reviews, all those sorts of things. But then a big important thing was the business and product contests, so tasks. So Linear, Azure DevOps, Jira. So what did you intend to build? What deliverables ultimately what got shipped? And so that whole view of design and concept all the way to deployment was kind of baked in from the beginning. And now we've added to it all of the tooling aspects of this. And it's such a sprawl now. So we're pulling in, kind of user behavioral data around how are people using AI coding tools like Copilot, Cursor, Claude Code, and we can get into all the different ways you get that data. But also peer review agents, and now increasingly agents of any kind, right? That's the future. These things are going to be, agentic, not just agentic coding, but actual agents that do specific jobs are going to be at all parts of the development lifecycle, review, testing, validation, deployment. And so understanding their role throughout that whole process and how you're leveraging them is going to be part of the story of, are you good at this as an org? Are you not? And where are the bottlenecks, if you're not achieving your goals?
I guess you've witnessed the takeoff, this kind of rocket ship that must be happening at the moment. Your job was actually probably quite easy before Claude Code, or before coding went truly agentic as it has now. You were probably looking at manual writes and pull requests were a reasonable cadence. And now what are you seeing? You're just seeing that 2 times, 10 times, 50 times from the kind of, and what was there a moment in time when you could say, well, that actually was about 2024 or 2023 when we begun to see where this was going?
Yeah, it's been well, it's a tech startup. It's never been easy. It's software, so you've talked to enough software people to know it's never been easy. The data is complicated in its own right, just understanding get data and how it relates to all these different things. But certainly for a long time, the acceleration, I'll put it a couple ways. One is that there's been a series of moments, right? And I think you've probably seen this too, where there's been these step changes where it was, coding was kind of fancy autocomplete. And then we got agentic coding and it kind of didn't really work. And then the models got better and they could, but they couldn't do everything. And then this, from kind of the fall to now, you hear a lot of people talking about, and I experienced personally, just an increasing number of people saying like, AI writes all the code for me now, right? There's an increasing number of jobs and domains where it can just do an awful lot of the work and it couldn't. So we keep seeing these step changes. So it's sort of a series of moments, but it's very, quantum, so to speak. The other way that I think about it is this kind of acceleration of, in a lot of ways, what we've seen so far is the easy part. And what I mean by that is fast as things have transformed and as radically as it seems like software development has been disrupted, we've mostly met software and developers where they are, right? Like most of this today is still people using the same IDEs that they use, but just juiced up, building software the same way, but faster, doing review the same way, and agentic coding, where things are headed, and where kind of the leading companies are starting to break away and things are starting to change. It looks very different, right? Like an AI native company started today is building things very different. They're building product differently. Like everything is changing for those companies. And that's kind of the next thing that I'm thinking a lot about is what are those major changes culturally, process-wise? Those are bigger. That's not just buying a new tool. That's change how you build product, how the business sells product. They're big changes.
So why is there this big ROI kind of paradox? People are, as you say, working very differently. There's clearly a huge new opportunity to work differently. But you're also seeing all those headlines saying, we're not really seeing the gains. Why do you see PRs are getting put faster, code speed is measurably up, but there's not this big revolution, and there's a lot of stories about it's not really impacting the bottom line for companies.
I do find that funny because I see this in our data. We see a lot of conflicting stories. We've learned a lot. We're putting together the pieces. But one of the reasons I find it funny is I see some reactions, in the conversation about, well, I'm seeing all these conflicting things, but then, you and I, we've used these tools ourselves and they're spiky, right? They're very good at some things. And then there's gaps. There's gaps in the kinds of jobs that they can do. So that's one angle, is just they're so powerful, but there's still like major blind spots, major chunks of things. Like they still struggle with infra is a good example of like, I don't hear a lot of success stories of people being able to use AI at scale to manage all of their infrastructure. It's still a very kind of human and engineer centric thing. Not surprising to me, but maybe surprising to some people is just how much organizational change needs to happen. And we all know, anyone who's worked in a company knows that changing organizations and human behavior is hard and slow and painful. And you think of all of the things that happen to take a product from concept and strategy to actually being delivered, to actually being sold, right? There's just a massive amount, the first 90% and the second 90%. And that second 90% is sales enablement and marketing and things. It's so much that has to change. And so that's what we're seeing now is you can code a lot faster, but it doesn't mean that your roadmap is adapted. It doesn't mean your sales process is adapted. And that's ultimately where ROI comes from, is the whole business working differently. That's the risk when you're not starting as an AI native company, but trying to retrofit that, is whether and how you can make those massive shifts.
So you might have a long backlog of items which never really justified the effort, but now the effort is a lot lighter. They do, so you get to work on them Or you might have a lot of feature ideas that you never really had time to get round to, but now you have time to get round to them. So you're getting round to them and doing them. But none of these things are really going to make a difference to your revenue or your margins. Are you almost feeling like we're picking off the small stuff, but we're not working on the big stuff? Or AI coding really impacts the engineering team, but that's just one team in a much bigger company that doesn't, again, really impact the revenue or the margins.
Yeah, I mean that's human nature to start with the small stuff, solve the problems we know how to solve. Procrastinate on the really hard problems. We all do that. But when you look to the success stories here, you look to the companies that are leading these things. You hear stories about. We see this in our leading customers, and these are changes we're trying to make ourselves. Um, a sort of a product discovery motion that is much more prototype heavy, and it just takes some cultural changes and some getting used to, instead of going from sort of big long mock-ups and roadmaps and a certain, kind of user research motion to we can rapidly build all the prototypes. It used to be ideas were cheap and execution was hard. Now execution is cheap. How do you adapt the way that you do product discovery to that, right? And reaching a comfort level, you might have an org where, um, you know, sales folks have been burned by engineering not delivering fast enough before, and maybe when an engineer says, "Oh, we could win that deal, we could build that thing, you need to win that deal for you by the end of the week," right? Actually leveraging that new superpower takes a little bit of time and trust and organizational change and communication, right? Those are the unlocks when everybody in the org realizes what's really possible. And we're living in a world where I barely wrapping my head around what's possible week to week, day to day. It's changing so fast. So for a whole company to operate differently based on the potential of those possibilities, that's just huge, right?
And what companies are like doing it noticeably differently or better? So you talk about like legacy companies trying to retrofit. You talk about first companies who have maybe like started after 2025 and really, doing this. That's the only way they know how to do it. Do you have any kind of examples you could look to or that you kind of recommend? You've got a big report coming. Probably have some kind of information. And
Yeah, I mean, we don't name specific customers in our trends page, but it's based on our customer base. I see there's kind of three archetypes that jump to mind, and I'm sure we can find or talk about examples in either of them. One archetype that's obvious is the kind of AI native in the bubble, folks that are building these new AI tools, right? And so they're either new or they're so front and center around building these tools that they're the experts in using them, and so they're adapting quickly. And so these are, a lot of us look to Anthropic, for example. Those are the things that go viral. Is well, this is how Anthropic uses Claude Code, and if of course they'll be the experts at that, but the way that they build those products, right, have adapted to that. So that's one example. Another archetype we see a lot, and we have examples in here. So here in Boston, I'm based in Boston. Our local Massachusetts AI coalition is led by a bunch of kind of very AI forward companies. One of them is a Whoop, a fitness brand. They wear fitness wearables. But that's an example of a company that had invested a lot in AI, as a kind of a core product competency, right? There's a lot of kind of machine intelligence. So companies that were on the machine learning, deep learning kind of flywheel, a lot of them saw this coming, and if they were able to adapt, they may have had years to think about this, whereas companies that didn't invest as heavily in that because it wasn't central to their product weren't those places. So there's companies I think that are a little ahead of this just because they've bet so much of their value on the promise of AI and have seen where this is trending for a while. Because it's not new. This has been bubbling for 5-10 years. We knew these things were coming. We just didn't know how fast. And then the third thing that we see a lot of success with are the people that are just taking decisive top down action and just investing a lot. Just saying like we need to bite the bullet and bite it hard of investing in the training, the tooling, the enablement. It's not going to be cheap, and it's going to be a one and done. Like we're gonna transform and we're done. Like these are big shifts, but you need to invest in training. You need to tie it to performance. You need to send a clear message. So you see companies having success, just saying like, this is what we're doing now, right? This is the new, and there's varying reactions in the media, but more often than not, I'm seeing it, and the ones in our customer base that are doing it, like it's that kind of decisive commitment to it is what's required for something of a shift of this magnitude.
And probably you're also going to be, you're also, well, you should be doing this yourself over at Jellyfish, right? So there must have been some products or some services which you never thought you were going to be able to do the way you wanted to do them, and now it's suddenly maybe become possible. Have you, like, you've got a huge data set. Have you figured out how to make that more accessible through a chat interface or tool calling, or like, have you applied it to your own work?
Yes, absolutely, and that's kind of so there's a bunch of angles. So one is just for me personally, I mean, I do my job wildly differently now than I did 6 months or a year ago. And a big part of it is the extent to which I or any leader can and should be kind of a builder and an IC. One, because I can in 20% of my time, the amount of analysis I can personally do and kind of, get my hands dirty, getting the data, the things I can do with agents to assist me with that, I can do essentially like a full-time job digging into the data. And it gives me firsthand exposure to what's actually happening in the data. It gives me credibility with these tools. It keeps me on the cutting edge. And I personally don't trust the opinion of any leader who's not working with these tools themselves, right? Everyone credible in this conversation is using it. When you talk to anybody, you have a conversation with someone, and you can tell immediately if they're actually living this life or they're just reading about it. And you have to live it. So there's that angle. We're building all these things in the product and watching the shift from you should do AI things because you remember, call it a year ago when people were bolting on AI features just to say we had AI. Now it's a shift to, no, that's just how you build software and a customer experience that people expect. We anticipated, like a lot of folks, that just the bar was going to raise so fast, and what users expect in terms of intelligence out of a product is that's going to raise so fast that intelligent, easy to use conversational interfaces are just how software increasingly works and how it's expected to work. So it kind of all becomes AI. And then the next phase of this is the kind of agentification of everything. So thinking about, we're constantly having soul searching about how long is Jellyfish a web app, like we're building agents, we have agents, and we're plugging these things into Slack and thinking about agent experience, which is a term that I didn't think about, a year ago. That's the form factor. Is it going to be other people's agents talking to our agent? Are they coming to us? Where does it live? That's the new kind of product paradigm that's increasingly consuming the mental cycles. Is, the value is, your data and intelligence, but that thing is going to live in an agent, and where it lives and how it operates and whether it interacts with humans or AIs or both, what that looks like. That's where the future is for essentially every software product.
And so, as you say, you're busier than ever because it's not just that you're doing what you were doing and now you've got somebody to do it for you. Doing what you were doing anyway, you're just doing this new thing as well. So it's it sounds to me like it's not that AI came along and you suddenly find you can do your job in 4 hours a day instead of 8. You're taking that remaining 4 hours and you're doing something totally new and different as well.
Yeah. So I mean, it's never. We've been promised that robots and automation we're going to make our lives easier since Isaac Asimov or whatever, but never seems to work out that way, right? The bar just keeps getting raised. So I do think, I love being able to focus on the essence of things. And I personally, one of the reasons I'm so bullish on AI in my own work is because I like writing code, and I like the kinds of, I like working in Python and Pandas and the types of data science things I tend to work in, but it's mostly a means to an end. And so, if I can focus on what the data means and the insights to get and the stories to tell and what's important, kind of accelerating the details of that, like I'm fine with AI handling a lot of the details there. It's not doing the thinking for me about what matters or how to look at the data. It might provide suggestions, but I'm steering that. I can do a lot more, but I'm certainly not working less hours. It's more. So, you'll hear a lot of people say, I share this view of, it's almost the opposite, where now, because the sort of gap between concept and reality is so shortened, there's anxiety about any moment you're not telling an agent to do something that's on your mind feels wasted,
I can definitely see that. Why do different teams, mileage vary then? So you probably have seen statistical changes in the type of commits happening, the languages predominantly being used, monorepo, polyrepo code bases. What kind of trends are you seeing between those really doing very well with their cadence or with their products and those kind of staying still?
Obvious one is there's just big gaps in the maturity here. So, people are learning to use these tools, and we do see people who are, prompting is a skill, working with these tools are a skill, getting used to spec-driven development and the kinds of things that set them up for success, guardrails. So all those things, those are a big factor in success here. And you see plenty of stories online about people saying, well, I asked AI to do this or that, and it did the wrong thing and deleted my whole database and it pushed this bug. And 9 times out of 10, like, there's already a best practice answer for why that shouldn't have happened. And they just didn't know to do that. But, we're driving cars that don't have seat belts yet. You've got to make your own seat belts, you've got to paint your own lines on the road. And until those things are more accessible or people learn that they have to do those things, there's going to be lots of people who get hurt by the sharp edges. That's just kind of the nature of technology that's moving this fast. So that's an obvious one. More subtle ones are, and these are sort of the big rocks that I talk about that companies have to move in order to really unlock the potential here, are context and infrastructure things. The things that made life hard for developers before, like, having sprawling, complex repositories, and it's not clear how they interconnect, and the rules for how they relate to each other and relate to your product and relate to your infrastructure are things that a few senior engineers know, and you have to ask them. It being hard and brittle to deploy, if you accelerate the machine, all of those flaws are just amplified. So, in kind of AI language, right, they're context problems and environment problems. If you, just like a developer, if you set them up with all the context they need to do their job and a perfect walled garden where they can't hurt themselves and all the tests run beautifully, and when they know they've done the right thing, it's easy to deploy, a human will be successful and an AI will be successful. And so those are the things, as people just try to go faster, there's no shortcuts to those things. AI can help, right? It can help you write code to do big migrations and move your code around. But they're rocks that you have to move to really unlock things. And that's where we see people getting stuck with the agentic transformation. This whole idea of meeting people where they were before. Yeah, you can kind of amplify individual developers, and they can use the same ways they knew how to circumvent those problems. They can do that just now with some AI help. That's a very different animal. For robot needs to do all those things on its own. It needs to miss all the potholes that you expect your developers to miss every day. Teaching agents how to do that is hard. You either need to fill in the potholes or put a ton of context around so they know to drive around them.
And is there any standard? Is there any common practice where this is what good looks like?
Standard for, there's lots of different standards. There's a couple different ways to think about that. One that's fascinating is how fast standards in general have emerged in this space. I remember when MCP came about, and now we're not sure of the value of MCP, but I remember when MCP came about, and it quickly went from, oh, here's a proposed thing, to everyone saying, yeah, we'll just use, the foundation lab's like not not fighting about it and just kind of signing on. The same things happened with skills, right? Skills came out and they were so obviously useful, and everyone just said, like, yeah, this is what we'll do. And then the idea that a lot of these things, skills, context, they just boil down to Markdown files. They're file structures, they're repositories. So an awful lot of what I'm describing, it sounds, when people talk about context engineering, it sounds a little arcane, but it's really just writing stuff down, and it almost doesn't matter because of the flexibility of agents. I talked to someone who they just had so much context and Confluence, they're just using that, and it seems crazy. It's such a clunky tool that you would push documentation to and pull it from Confluence. But if you have enough there, like an agent can handle it. But people are doing a ton of this with Notion. They're doing it directly in Git repos, mostly just picking a place to keep all the information and keep it, put it there. You'll see, I think, common architectures evolving and starting to see around, okay, well, now I need an agent that's its only job is to look at and find where documentation is missing or where it's old, where it's atrophied, and fix that. Those are the things you'll start to see come online as kind of proactive, automated agents that are just there to kind of keep, weeding the walled garden that you've set up for your other agents to be successful in.
But there's not like or is there an agent pack where you would just say any project needs to these? Feels like we're still kind of building our own or writing our own, or it's all on a case by case basis.
Yes, I think it's very much roll your own. I think that one of the reasons for that is I think people don't know yet. You see crazy stuff. I'm sure you've heard of Steve Yegi's Gas Town, right? Like there's the insane versions of this. Like everyone's is a little different for lots of reasons, and you grow this thing organically. So now when you're trying to, everyone's developer workflow is different. Now you put agents into this mix. There's just a lot of bespoke differences company to company that have to be worked around. And agents can do this, but I think this is the advantage of easy to write, personalized software, personalized automation. It's just so easy to say, hey, Claude, write a connector that does this. I think this is part of why CLIs and whatnot, direct API use is so dominant. Instead of say, like, I want a universal connector for this, to just say, no, here's how you connect, figure it out. Agent just figures it out, and it's a lot cheaper than a developer spending a day or a couple days writing a suite of tools to do that.
So your trajectories are not focused on, for example, languages or setup. Like anything can be made to work.
There's the training differences of, certainly if you think about the training corpus and the way that LLMs work, verbose, typed, highly structured languages, things like Python and JavaScript, like the things that there's a ton of training data around and LLMs were kind of optimized to be very good at, like those are dominant. And things that are more arcane and have a lot more gotchas or are more related to physical things like on the processor or in the cloud. So like writing Terraform or something for infra is harder, and it's not as good as that at that. And so, we see in the data, and I believe when I talk to people, I talk to infra folks and they're like, yeah, it's bad at writing Terraform. Like I believe that because there's often a lot you need to know about how your actual servers are set up to write something that's not going to blow up your production.
With all of that information that you're sitting on, that you're pulling in from 10 or 20 different sources, what is your typical kind of customer? Because what I'm kind of interested in is how do you then transform that to an insight that somebody can deploy that makes a difference, that justifies the price? What's your typical customer, and where are they when they kind of come to you with, we know we got a problem and we need to fix it with what you guys do?
Yeah. So, typical Jellyfish customers is going to be, you start at a couple dozen up to a couple hundred, and then largest customers, several thousand, tens of thousands. But you need to be big enough that the engineering machine is hard to understand. If you've got 20 engineers, a good head of engineering can know everything that's going on. You have 100 engineers. Now you need observability to understand what's happening. When it comes to AI transformation, a lot of folks are just starting with, we have tools. Are they being used? How are they being used? Are they being used well? That was the beginning of the journey. And then they want to know, are we shipping more code? And if we're not, what are the bottlenecks? And, popular bottlenecks to think about are reviews getting backed up? Are reviews getting rejected? Are defects going up? Are we rolling back more code? So these kinds of operational things. things. Increasingly, people are interested in agents and agentic coding. So how much agentic coding is happening? Is that code, passing? Is it being reviewed? What projects is it being used on? Those deliverables shipping faster, those kinds of things. And then a very exciting new area for us is, we've just started within the past couple months to be able to collect data around the models that people are using and token usage. So a huge thing is people want to know what models are people using and are they, effective, and associated with that, what are they costing? A lot of customers have gotten to a point, we've gotten to a point where these are meaningful chunks of engineering spend. And for orgs that traditionally, in terms of fixed headcount, you would grow, but it was sort of a once a year thing or twice a year thing where you're like, well, how many more people are we going to hire? But then once you've done that exercise, the rest of the time, you've got the engineers, I've got 100 engineers. Well, how do I maximize what I can do with them? Now you're in a world where you can spend almost infinite money if you like. What does that buy you, and are you getting good value for that money? So, the sort of token economics of this stuff. Some folks spending a lot of tokens is a virtuous thing at the moment. It means we're doing AI development right. That's kind of the first order, kind of crude cut. It quickly gets to a point of, are we getting good value for all of that inference spend? Is it actually accelerating us? Is it actually providing business value?
So maybe we're going to be juggling between open source local models for specific jobs, and then we go to the cloud when we need some real heavy lifting.
Yeah, the open source one is interesting because the open source models have gotten so capable, and we're not seeing the uptake in the enterprise, at least not in our customer base. And I think it's just because there's there's still these subsidies, I guess, but just the form factor. You've got all these, security and compliance and all these things, and it's very easy to just use Amazon Bedrock. We see a lot of companies. Amazon's a big winner here in a lot of ways, and people are paying a premium to use these models on Amazon because it's just easier, right? They've got so much of their infra in there, so much of their security posture is built into that. And so, we're not seeing the same uptake, but that might be an individual versus a corporate difference here, or you might see the price shifts really force people to adapt here. But there's so many directions this could go, And
I guess the last thing is something you mentioned, which was you're beginning to almost kind of move out of just pure engineering functions, and you're looking at different departments. You're seeing marketing creeping into some of the development repos. You're seeing context from sales, and their work beginning to actually happen in coding environments because it's all context, and that's so important. Do you feel your future is in looking at more of an organization and more of a client rather than just the engineering function now that everything is being touched by AI?
Yes, I agree with that observation. For us right now, I think the product and design are obvious next frontiers. These boundaries have become very, very blurred at kind of the cutting edge AI first companies. And that's where I expect this to go, is the difference between, and the feedback loop between product concept and interfacing with a user or a customer on that, and turning that innovation loop requires such a mix of product thinking and design and building and partnership with the AI on things like design. The ability of somebody who would have worn the PM hat in the past to go build things and fix tasks or fix bugs, do a demo with a customer, have the customer have an idea, vibe code a new version before you talk to the next customer. So that, I think, merges into a much, more fluid thing for the software development lifecycle that you want to look at holistically. So I fully expect that to be a place that we go. Getting all the way to marketing and sales, that's kind of a bigger step that depends on, your sales motion and your company. Sometimes the gap between that side of the house and engineering is quite big. Sometimes it's so that one depends a little more, I think, on the shape of the company, how much that's all kind of one thing.
Sure.
But I agree with you that I expect it to just get kind of closer and closer and more integrated.
And I guess the last thing is, what are we going to be talking about in, say, 6 months' time? What are you kind of beginning to suggest or TL? Because these things take a long time to percolate through a company.
I mean, what's normal now is that you have to use AI to help you write code. We're encouraging everyone to think about now is what is your path to autonomous agents? And I think that's just a bigger lift. If you spend all your time, if you're terminally online, it sounds like everyone on Twitter X has just figured this out already. But that's a much bigger and harder shift for a lot of companies, as we've talked about. And so those are big rocks, as I've said, that you need to think about how you're going to move. Could be big migrations in your code base, big changes in your development environment, big changes in your compliance, security posture, those kinds of things. So that's one version. The other thing that is kind of on everybody's mind right now is what's happening to the software development lifecycle, and in particular, code review. So if you just accelerate this one part of coding, what does human review look like? What does accountability look like? How do we accelerate uh, deciding what to build and the design part? Every developer's twice as effective. Does that mean to do the same amount of stuff, we need twice as many product people or twice as many designers? Or, it sort of starts to front load maybe the beginning of the process and front loads the end of the process. And so adapting to what that looks like for the whole place, the whole industry, but also you as a company, you should be thinking about where you need to move for that.